Picture this. The crisp mountain air fills your lungs as you stand at the edge of a vast wilderness. The towering pines sway gently in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a bird calls out to the fading day. This is where our story begins. Not just any story, but one of unexpected connection, of finding something precious when all else seems lost. It's about two men, Alex and Jamie, who ventured into the wilderness expecting a simple camping trip, but discovered something far more valuable along the way. Alex had always been the careful one. With his meticulously organized backpack and dog-eared trail guides, he approached the outdoors like he approached his life, with careful planning and consideration for every possible scenario. His apartment back in the city was just as orderly, each item in its designated place, his schedule mapped out weeks in advance. This trip was no different. He'd researched the best camping spots, checked weather forecasts for weeks, and packed emergency supplies that would make a survival expert proud. Jamie, on the other hand, embodied spontaneity. His approach to the wilderness mirrored his approach to life. Embrace the unknown, follow your instincts, and trust that things will work out. His backpack was stuffed haphazardly with essentials and non-essentials alike, and he'd been known to change hiking plans on a whim because a particular sunbeam through the trees caught his attention. Where Alex saw potential dangers, Jamie saw opportunities for discovery. These two had been friends for years, their opposing personalities creating a balance that somehow worked. But lately, something had been shifting between them. Lingering glances, excuses to spend more time together, and a tension that neither had been brave enough to acknowledge. This weekend camping trip was suggested as a way to reconnect, to escape the noise and demands of their busy urban lives. But perhaps, unknowingly, they both hoped for something more. As they loaded the car early Friday morning, their contrasting approaches were immediately evident. Alex checked items off his list methodically, while Jamie tossed in last-minute additions, a frisbee, his favorite mug, an extra sweater, just because it feels right. Their banter was easy, comfortable, yet charged with something unspoken. Did you really need to bring 3 different types of insect repellent? Jamie teased, holding up bottles from Alex's carefully organized supplies. Alex smiled, a slight flush coloring his cheeks that he blamed on the morning chill. You'll thank me when you're the only one without mosquito bites around the campfire tonight. The drive to the trailhead took them through winding roads that gradually left civilization behind. They talked about everything and nothing, work frustrations, a movie they'd both seen recently, memories from previous outdoor adventures. As the landscape grew wilder around them, something seemed to loosen in both men. The constraints of their daily lives, the roles they played, began to fall away with each mile. When they finally arrived at the trailhead, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees. The parking area was nearly empty, just as Alex had planned, choosing a less popular trail for more solitude. The air here was different, cleaner, sharper, filled with the scent of pine and earth. They stood for a moment, taking it in, their shoulders nearly touching as they gazed at the trail disappearing into the forest ahead. Ready for this? Jamie asked, his voice softer than usual, as if respecting the quiet dignity of the wilderness around them. Alex nodded, adjusting his pack. Lead the way. The hike to their intended campsite wasn't long, perhaps 2 miles in, but it took them deep enough into the forest to feel removed from the outside world. The trail wound through stands of ancient trees, crossed a small bubbling stream, and gradually climbed to a ridge that offered glimpses of distant mountains. Jamie moved ahead occasionally, drawn to interesting rocks or unusual plants, while Alex maintained a steady pace, consulting his map at regular intervals. By the time they reached the small clearing Alex had selected for their camp, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The spot was perfect, level ground for their tent, a natural stone fire ring left by previous campers, and a view that opened to the valley below. Together, they fell into the rhythm of setting up camp, their movements around each other practiced and comfortable, yet with a new awareness that hadn't been there before. As dusk settled over the forest, Alex built a fire while Jamie arranged logs around it for seating. The first stars appeared overhead, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. They prepared a simple meal of foil-wrapped potatoes and canned chili, which somehow tasted better than any restaurant fare in the crisp mountain air. The campfire cast a warm glow across their faces as they sat side by side, shoulders occasionally brushing. Conversation flowed easily at first, stories from work, plans for future trips, observations about the day's hike. But as the night deepened and the fire burned lower, their words gave way to more meaningful exchanges. "Do you ever wonder," Jamie began, poking at the embers with a stick, "if we're missing something? Living the way we do in the city, always rushing, always connected to everything except what's right in front of us." Alex considered this, watching the play of light across Jamie's features. "Sometimes, but then I get moments like this, away from it all with." He hesitated, "with good company, and it puts things in perspective." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Jamie smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made something flutter in Alex's chest. The moment stretched, comfortable yet charged with possibility. As the temperature dropped, they moved closer to the fire and consequently, closer to each other. When Jamie shivered slightly, Alex, without thinking, put an arm around his shoulders. It was a simple gesture, one that could be explained away as practical in the mountain chill, but they both knew it was more. Jamie leaned into the touch, and they stayed that way, watching the flames dance until the fire burned down to glowing coals. That night in the tent, lying in their separate sleeping bags just inches apart, both men lay awake longer than they admitted, aware of each other's breathing in the darkness, wondering what the next day might bring. Morning arrived with birdsong and dappled sunlight filtering through the tent fabric. They emerged to a world washed clean by overnight dew, the forest around them vibrant and alive. Over a breakfast of instant coffee and oatmeal, they planned a day hike to a nearby lake Alex had marked on his map. "It should be about 4 miles round trip," Alex explained, tracing the route with his finger. "The guidebook says there's a waterfall along the way." Jamie nodded, sipping his coffee. "Sounds perfect. Let on, navigator." They set out with day packs, leaving their camp set up for their return. The morning was glorious, sunshine streaming through the canopy, wildflowers dotting the undergrowth, and a sense of being the only two people for miles. Their conversation was punctuated by comfortable silences, each lost in their own appreciation of the surroundings, yet acutely aware of the other's presence. The trail was well marked at first, with occasional wooden signs confirming they were on the right path. Alex checked his map periodically, making note of landmarks. Jamie moved with easy confidence, occasionally straying from the path to investigate interesting features, a twisted tree, a patch of unusual mushrooms, a glimpse of a deer through the underbrush. It was during one of these detours, about 2 hours into their hike, that they realized something was wrong. Jamie had wandered off to photograph a particularly spectacular view from a rocky outcrop, while Alex waited on what he thought was the main trail. When Jamie returned, they continued walking for nearly 20 minutes before Alex stopped abruptly. "This doesn't look right," he said, frowning at his map, then at their surroundings. The well-defined path they had been following had gradually become less distinct, narrowing until it was barely visible among the forest undergrowth. Jamie looked around, his usual carefree expression giving way to concern. "Maybe we took a wrong turn after that last ridge?" Alex retraced their route on the map, trying to identify where they might have gone astray. "I think we might have followed a game trail instead of the main path after you went to take those photos." They backtracked for a while, looking for familiar landmarks, but the forest seemed to have closed in around them, each direction looking frustratingly similar. Alex felt the first stirrings of real worry. He prided himself on his preparation, on always knowing exactly where he was and where he was going. This loss of control was unfamiliar and unsettling. "Let's try heading east," he suggested, consulting his compass. "The main trail runs north-south, so we should intersect it eventually." Jamie nodded, watching Alex's face carefully. "Hey," he said softly, placing a hand on Alex's arm. "We're going to be fine. We have water, food, and each other. What's the worst that could happen? We have to spend an extra night under the stars." Alex managed a smile, grateful for Jamie's steadying presence despite his own growing anxiety. "You're right. Let's keep moving while we have good light." They pushed on through increasingly difficult terrain, dense underbrush, fallen logs, rocky inclines. The afternoon wore on, and the sun began its westward descent, casting longer shadows through the trees. Despite their efforts, there was no sign of the main trail, and Alex's attempts to find their location on the map grew more frustrated. I don't understand, he muttered, more to himself than to Jamie. We should have hit the trail by now. Jamie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for the past hour, sat down on a fallen log. Alex, he said gently, I think we need to accept that we're lost. The word hung between them, heavy with implications. Lost. The very thing Alex had spent his life avoiding, through careful planning and meticulous attention to detail. He felt a surge of something close to panic, quickly followed by a wave of embarrassment. He was supposed to be the responsible one, the one who kept them safe. I'm sorry, he said, his voice tight. This is my fault. I should have been paying closer attention. Jamie moved to sit beside him, their shoulders touching. Hey, no, this isn't on you. We both wandered off the trail. And honestly, I'm not even sure I care that much. Alex looked at him incredulously. You don't care that we're lost in the wilderness with limited supplies and no clear way back to camp? Jamie shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I'm with you. That's all that matters right now. The rest we'll figure out. There was something in Jamie's eyes that made Alex's breath catch, an openness, a vulnerability that mirrored what he himself had been feeling but couldn't express. For a moment, he forgot about being lost, about his responsibilities, about everything except the man sitting beside him. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving quickly in their direction. We need to find shelter, Alex said, standing and scanning their surroundings. A storm's coming. The urgency of their situation pushed personal revelations aside as they hurried to prepare for the approaching weather. They found a relatively protected area beneath a rocky overhang and quickly gathered branches to create a makeshift barrier against the wind and rain. The storm hit with surprising ferocity, driving rain, gusting winds that bent the treetops, and lightning that illuminated the darkened forest in brief, electric flashes. Huddled together in their improvised shelter, they were grateful for the minimal protection it offered, though water still found its way through in persistent drips and rivulets. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, they pressed closer together for warmth. Alex wrapped an arm around Jamie's shoulders, and Jamie leaned into him without hesitation. The simple contact provided comfort beyond the physical warmth it generated. Some adventure, huh? Jamie said, his voice barely audible above the storm. Alex tightened his arm around Jamie. Not exactly what I had planned. That's the thing about plans, Jamie replied, looking up at Alex with raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. Sometimes the best moments happen when they fall apart. In the dim light, with rain pattering around them and the forest shrouded in darkness, something shifted between them. The pretenses fell away, the careful distance they had maintained, the unspoken feelings they had danced around for months, perhaps years. Jamie, Alex began, his voice uncertain. But Jamie shook his head, reaching up to touch Alex's face with cold fingers. I know, he said simply, and then he was leaning in, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question being asked and answered in the same breath. When they pulled apart, both were smiling despite their circumstances. The second kiss was more certain, a confirmation of something long suspected but never acknowledged. I've wanted to do that for a very long time, Jamie admitted, his forehead resting against Alex's. Why didn't you? Alex asked, his fingers tracing patterns on Jamie's back. Jamie laughed softly. I was waiting for the right moment. Getting lost in the wilderness during a thunderstorm seemed as good a time as any. They spent the night talking in whispers, sharing thoughts and feelings that had remained unspoken for too long. The storm gradually subsided, leaving behind a gentle rain that pattered soothingly against the leaves. Despite their uncomfortable surroundings, there was a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place that had nothing to do with finding their way back to the trail. As dawn broke, they emerged from their shelter to a transformed landscape. The storm had passed, leaving the forest washed clean, droplets of water clinging to every surface and catching the early morning light like countless tiny prisms. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of wet earth and pine. They assessed their situation with clearer heads. Their supplies were limited but sufficient for another day. Alex's map, though somewhat water-damaged, was still usable. They decided to try a different approach, climbing to higher ground to get a better view of their surroundings. The climb was challenging, especially on the slippery post-storm terrain. They helped each other over difficult sections, hands lingering longer than necessary, exchanging smiles that held new meaning. When they finally reached a clearing near the top of a ridge, they were rewarded with a panoramic view of the valley below. "Look," Jamie pointed excitedly. "I can see the main trail from here." Sure enough, about half a mile to the west, they could make out the distinctive line of the hiking trail cutting through the forest. Alex consulted his map, finally able to pinpoint their location. "We're actually not far from where we camped," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Maybe 2 miles as the crow flies, though it'll be a bit longer going around rather than over this ridge." With renewed energy and direction, they began making their way toward the trail. The going was easier with a clear destination in mind, though the terrain remained challenging. They talked as they walked, making plans for when they returned to civilization, acknowledging that something fundamental had changed between them. "So what happens when we get back?" Jamie asked, helping Alex over a fallen tree. Alex considered this. "Well, first, a hot shower and a proper meal." Jamie laughed. "And after that?" Alex stopped walking, turning to face Jamie fully. "After that, I think we see where this goes. Together." The smile that spread across Jamie's face was worth every difficult moment of their misadventure. They continued on, hands occasionally finding each other as they navigated the forest. When they finally reached the main trail, the sense of accomplishment was palpable. The path back to their campsite was straightforward from there, and they arrived in the early afternoon, tired but triumphant. Their tent stood just as they had left it, a welcome sight after their unexpected detour. That evening, as they sat by a new campfire, their relationship felt both familiar and entirely new. They sat closer than before, fingers intertwined, the barriers between them dissolved by their shared experience. "You know," Jamie said thoughtfully, watching the flames, "getting lost might have been the best thing that could have happened to us." Alex nodded, thinking of how differently things might have gone if they had simply followed the trail as planned, returned to camp on schedule, and gone back to their separate lives without ever acknowledging what lay between them. "I've been thinking about what you said during the storm," he said, "about plans falling apart leading to the best moments." Jamie looked at him expectantly. And I think you're right. Sometimes you have to get lost to find what you're really looking for." As night fell around them, stars appearing one by one in the clear post-storm sky, they made plans of a different sort, not just for the remainder of their trip, but for the days and weeks that would follow. They talked about future adventures, about balancing Alex's need for preparation with Jamie's spontaneity, about building something together that incorporated the best of both their approaches to life. Their last night in the wilderness was filled with a sense of possibility that had nothing to do with maps or trails and everything to do with the connection they had found. As they lay together, Jamie rested his head on Alex's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You know," Jamie murmured sleepily, "holding me is warmer than a map." Alex laughed softly, tightening his arms around Jamie, "and considerably more pleasant." In that moment, surrounded by the vast wilderness that had first separated and then united them, they found a different kind of navigation, one that relied not on compasses or trail markers, but on the steady pull of two hearts finding their way to each other. The journey back to civilization the next day was bittersweet. They packed up their campsite efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence except perhaps in the stories the forest might tell of two people who entered as friends and left as something more. The hike back to the trailhead was easy, their steps light despite their packs, their conversation flowing with a new ease born of honesty and shared vulnerability. As they loaded their gear into the car and prepared for the drive back to the city, they took one last look at the wilderness that had changed everything. The forest stood silent and majestic, indifferent to the small human dramas that played out beneath its canopy, yet somehow essential to their unfolding. "Ready to go back?" Alex asked, keys in hand. Jamie nodded, but not before pulling Alex close for one more kiss. There at the edge of the wilderness where their story had truly begun. "Ready," he said. "But this isn't an ending." "No," Alex agreed, smiling as they got into the car. "Definitely a beginning." And as they drove away, leaving the wilderness behind but carrying its lessons with them, they understood that sometimes the most important journeys aren't marked on any map. They're written in moments of connection, in the courage to veer off the planned path, and in the discovery that being lost with the right person can feel remarkably like coming home. Total underscore char underscore count, 18,739.